Biden versus Trump. Save the planet or save the economy? Imagine waking up one morning to find your city submerged underwater, or stepping outside to see a barren land, so dry and cracked that not a single drop of water remains. This is not the plot of a science fiction movie. It is the future that many scientists warn could become reality if climate change continues unchecked. But there is a problem. Not everyone believes in it. Donald Trump once declared, "Climate change is a hoax." Meanwhile, Joe Biden insists, "We must act now before it's too late." One side believes that climate concerns are exaggerated, while the other sees it as the greatest crisis humanity has ever faced. But who is right? Who is wrong? And most importantly, who is truly protecting America and the planet? One side prioritizes the economy, believing that without a strong economy, no country can effectively address climate change. The other side argues that if action is not taken now, the environmental damage will be irreversible. Two opposing approaches, two different ideologies. But is either side actually doing better? Biden or Trump? Who has the better climate policy? Let's analyze the facts, and you decide for yourself. Trump's climate policy: economy or environment? We are living in a time when climate change is no longer a distant prediction. Droughts, hurricanes, and wildfires are becoming more frequent. And glaciers at the poles are melting faster than ever. Yet in 2016, one man stood up and declared that all of this was just a hoax: Donald Trump. Trump's stance on climate change was not random. It reflects the mindset of a businessman, someone who prioritizes economic interests above all else. And to understand why he did this, we need to look back at history. Over 100 years ago, the Industrial Revolution changed the world. Coal and oil became the lifeblood of the modern economy, driving rapid national development. But they also led to a dramatic increase in CO2 emissions, contributing to the global warming crisis we are witnessing today. So why did Trump support fossil fuels, even as the world tried to move away from them? The answer is simple. America has relied on oil and gas for too long, and he believed that abandoning them too soon would be an economic disaster. As president, Trump did something unprecedented. He withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Agreement on climate change. This was an international pact involving nearly 200 countries, committing to reducing emissions to keep global temperatures from rising above 2°C. But Trump said, "It's unfair. China and India continue to pollute while the U.S. pays the price." Not only did he pull out of this agreement, but he also reversed numerous environmental regulations from the Obama administration. Oil and coal companies were granted looser regulations, allowing them to operate with fewer concerns about emissions or water pollution. But what stood out most was how he approached environmental issues. Trump did not see them as a priority. He believed that protecting the U.S. economy was more important than participating in global efforts to combat climate change. And in some ways, he proved his point. Under Trump, gas prices in the U.S. were lower, traditional energy companies rebounded, and millions of jobs were created in the oil and coal industries. This won him strong support from industrial states like Texas and Pennsylvania. But there are always two sides to every story. While Trump pushed for fossil fuel expansion, U.S. CO2 emissions rose and natural disasters worsened. Scientists warned that if America did not join the fight against climate change, the world would suffer severe consequences. So the question is, was Trump truly wrong? Without a strong economy, how could the U.S. invest in clean energy? Or was it his negligence that caused America to fall behind in the race for renewable energy? And that's when Joe Biden stepped in, with a completely opposite policy. Biden's climate policy: ambition or effectiveness. If Trump is a businessman who always prioritizes the economy, then Biden is a politician who puts his trust in science. From the moment he took office, he declared, "We can no longer ignore climate change. We must act now." And Biden didn't just talk. He took immediate action. He signed an executive order to bring the U.S. back into the Paris Agreement, sending a clear message to the world. America was back in the fight against climate change. But Biden's ambitions didn't stop there. He proposed an unprecedented plan, a $2 trillion investment in clean energy. This included wind and solar power, electric vehicles, and upgrading the electrical grid to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. However, reality is never that simple. A large-scale plan requires major changes, and not everyone agrees with them. As Biden's administration tightened regulations on the oil and gas industry, tens of thousands of workers lost their jobs. Gas prices surged due to decreased supply, leading to higher living costs for Americans. This sparked outrage, especially in states that depend on the oil industry. A major question arose. Is Biden going too far? There is a fundamental economic principle. You can't destroy the old before the new is ready to replace it. Transitioning to clean energy takes time, but Biden pushed for rapid change. And when the economy wasn't fully prepared, the result was higher energy prices and greater financial strain on the public. All of this raises an important question. Is Biden's policy truly effective, or just an unrealistic dream? And more importantly, when the U.S. changes its policy, does the world actually change? Trump, Biden, and the future of the planet imagine Earth as a massive ship drifting through space. For millions of years, this ship has operated under natural laws, maintaining a delicate balance between climate, ecosystems, and life. Then, humans arrived. We extracted resources, burned fossil fuels, developed industries, and disrupted the ship's operating system. Now, temperatures are rising, ice caps are melting, and nature is changing in ways never seen before in history. Yet, while scientists continue to warn us, world leaders have taken very different approaches. The last two U.S. presidents, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, have implemented completely opposite climate policies. Trump believes that protecting the economy is the top priority, while Biden sees climate change as the greatest threat to humanity. Two different paths, two different perspectives. But how will they shape the future of Earth? When America changes, the world changes. History has shown that every decision made by the United States does not just impact the country itself, it influences the entire planet. When the U.S. joins the race for renewable energy, the world follows. When the U.S. weakens its climate commitments, other nations loosen their policies as well. Under Trump, the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Agreement, a pact signed by nearly 200 countries to reduce global emissions. This decision didn't just affect the U.S., it weakened global momentum in the fight against climate change. Some nations, like Brazil and India, used similar reasoning to continue their fossil fuel development. In contrast, when Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement and pledged to cut U.S. emissions by 50% by 2030, a wave of change followed. European countries strengthened their clean energy policies, China committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2060, and many major corporations began shifting toward environmentally friendly solutions. This demonstrates that, whether we like it or not, the U.S. remains the most influential nation in the fight against climate change. When the American president changes, so does the future of our planet. The irreversible consequences. But this issue is not just about policy. It is also about time. Scientists have warned that if we do not act in time, the damage caused by climate change will become irreversible. Take Greenland as an example. A vast Arctic land covered in ice. Years ago, scientists predicted that if temperatures continued to rise, the ice there would melt, causing sea levels to rise. But something even worse happened. In 2021, for the first time in recorded history, rain fell on the summit of Greenland's ice sheet, a phenomenon never seen before. If all of Greenland's ice melts, hundreds of millions of people living in coastal areas will lose their homes. Another example: wildfires. Under Trump, the U.S. experienced some of the worst wildfires in history, particularly in California. Trump blamed state authorities, arguing that they had failed in forest management. However, climate experts pointed out that rising temperatures were the real culprit, making forests drier and more flammable. Under Biden, wildfires have continued, but his administration has focused more on addressing the root causes, reducing emissions and investing in clean energy. But the pressing question remains: is it already too late? This planet belongs to no one. The climate crisis is not just a matter of Trump versus Biden. It concerns all of us. Earth does not belong solely to the US, China, or Europe. It is the shared home of humanity. Isaac Newton once said, "For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction." What we do today will determine the future. If Trump continues his policies, the US might enjoy a stronger economy in the short term, but the environmental consequences could last for centuries. If Biden accelerates the clean energy transition, the economy might suffer in the short term, but in the long run, it could be the only way to protect our planet. This brings us to a critical question. Is there a middle ground between economic growth and environmental protection? Some experts argue that instead of choosing one over the other, the US must find a way to integrate both. For example, instead of completely shutting down the oil industry, the government could invest in carbon capture technology to reduce emissions. Instead of focusing solely on electric vehicles, efforts could also be made to improve fuel efficiency in gasoline-powered engines to reduce overall consumption. But to achieve this, both sides must come to an agreement, something that, in today's American political landscape, might be the hardest challenge of all. We are at a crossroads in history. We are at a defining moment. This is no longer about what will happen in 50 or 100 years. It's happening within our generation. Some scientists warned that if we do not significantly cut emissions within the next 10 years, the consequences will be irreversible. Yet, politics remains divided. One side believes that economic growth must take priority and that climate issues can be dealt with later. The other side insists that time is running out and that every day without action brings the planet closer to disaster. The question is not just about whether Trump or Biden is right, but rather, can we find a way to avoid choosing between the economy and the environment? Is it possible to have a climate policy that strengthens America while also protecting the Earth? Or is the reality that saving this planet will require greater sacrifices than we realize? The answer might not lie in one president, but in us. Who has actually done better? Every time a US president leaves office, people ask, did they do better than their predecessor? But when it comes to climate change, the question is far more complex. This is not just about a few years. It is a long-term race that will impact generations. Donald Trump and Joe Biden have taken opposing approaches to climate policy. Trump bet on the economy, rolling back environmental regulations to boost growth. Biden invested heavily in renewable energy, accepting short-term economic challenges to pursue a long-term vision. So, who has actually done better? Looking at the numbers don't lie. During Trump's presidency, US emissions decreased by only 0.5% per year. However, this was not due to his policies, but rather external factors, such as reduced energy demand during the pandemic. When Biden took office, his administration poured billions of dollars into clean energy, seemingly putting the US on the right path. But there's an undeniable fact. Energy prices under Biden were higher, while under Trump, gas was cheaper, and Americans worried less about fuel costs. This raises a critical question. Does a strong climate policy have to make life more expensive for people? If we judge based on short-term economic impact, Trump appears to have done better by maintaining economic stability. But if we look further ahead, Biden's policies may lay the foundation for a more sustainable economy, one that makes the U.S. less dependent on fossil fuels. Short-term versus long-term thinking. The biggest challenge with climate policy is not data, but time. When a government implements a policy, we rarely see immediate results. The investments Biden is making in clean energy might not show their full impact for another 10 or 20 years, but by then, they could give the U.S. a leading advantage in renewable energy. On the other hand, Trump's policies strengthened the economy in the short term, but they slowed the transition to clean energy, something experts warn could hurt the U.S. when the world shifts toward new energy sources. So, what is the right choice? If you are focused on the present and concerned about the cost of living, you might say Trump did better. But if you are thinking about the future, Biden may be paving the way for a new energy era, even if the cost is high. What is the real question? Perhaps the right question is not, who did better, Trump or Biden? But rather, can we do better than both of them? Is there an alternative approach where the U.S. does not have to choose between a strong economy and protecting the environment? Can there be a policy that maintains economic strength while ensuring that this planet remains livable for future generations? Biden or Trump? Who has the better climate policy? The answer depends on how you see the issue. Economy or environment? Short-term or long-term? Immediate benefits or future security? Who do you think has done better? Or is the U.S. still searching for the right path? Comment below and let's debate.